this is a overview of the mesh tools in Curvy. Now for any mesh tool we need to start with some sort of primitive, be it a sphere or a sketched primitive. To help us work with meshes, we can view in wireframe. So for example, here's two objects. I'm just going to join them together. Join. And I'm going to make some copies of them so you can see the effects of the different tools. Okay, the first tool I'm going to use is the reduce tool. So if we want to simplify the number of triangles in the objects, if they've got two dents, we can reduce. You'll notice this somewhat distorts a few of the triangles, so they're a bit uneven. So we can use the relax command or Control R to make the triangles more evenly spaced over the objects. Just repeat. So mesh, reduce, we can choose how much we reduce it by. Let's really crush it down to 25% and relax. You see the objects still maintain their shape, but they've got a lot fewer triangles. Now if we started with a low poly object and we want to make it more dense, we can do the opposite. We can make the edges longer. Let's see. So we can increase the number of edges. Again, it spaces them out evenly over the model. Or we can only increase them in the areas which are already quite curved. So you see on this object, it's left big triangles on the flat areas and smaller triangles on the curved areas. Do that once more. See, it's got much finer granularity on the curved areas and it leaves the flat areas alone. And again, a quick polish with Control R smooths out the shape of the mesh. So there we've almost recovered the original shape from the low poly version. And finally we can mask an area of the mesh. Let's try that again. We can mask an area of the mesh and reduce along the boundary of the mask. This has created new triangles just between the selected and the unselected areas, which makes it much easier to distort gently. And then if we just refine a little bit to fix the distribution of triangles to make it nice and smooth, we've got a distorted shape. Okay, the other thing which we want to do with meshes a lot is make them symmetrical. So I'm just going to turn back on the grid so I see where my center line is. I'll just rotate this a bit so it's a more interesting shape. Okay, now we're going to mirror from right to left with the mirror tool, and we can smooth these off as well. See that they've now made a smooth shell, quite a different shape, but nice smooth join along the mirror. We can also use the explode tool to split an object into its different parts. Now we have the bottom separate to the top. Another thing which is very handy with meshes is to remove the seam between two different meshes and join them together. So I'm going to use weld to parent, which joins them together, and you can smooth along the seam for quite a smooth result. So we're joining two bits together. We can also cut and delete parts of the mesh. Let's try deleting a small part of the mesh. So just make a hole in the mesh and delete it. So now there's a big hole in our mesh. We can fix that automatically with stitch holes. Sorry, cap holes. That's filled in the gap on the mesh, and we've effectively healed that portion. We could cut off a larger part of the mesh with the same trick. So again, if we delete the masked area, cap the hole, smooth, there we've chopped off a whole part of the mesh quite easily. Just do another trick with this mesh. I'll pull it out a bit so I've got room to work with. And I'm going to make two holes this time, one on either side of the mesh. So there's a hole on the front. I'll smooth that out a bit. There's one hole, and we're going to go to the other side and make another hole. Just going to select the edge to smooth it off a little, and then I'm going to join the holes together. So there we've made a hole right through our object. And you can use the same trick to join meshes together. So if I delete some parts of the model, so now I've got I'm going to attempt to join these quite different parts together. So there's two holes in either side. First I'm going to join the meshes and then stitch the holes, As you can see, it's repaired both parts of the mesh. So we can easily copy, paste, stitch to make the mesh into what we want it to be. Now, as well as this, Curvy has a different mode where it takes several objects and makes a uniform mesh out of them. So here we have a low-res torus in the middle and 3 spheres. If we use the Voxel tools, I'll choose a rough size and I will merge the group and a little bit of a relax. We now have a smooth mixture of all of those different spheres and torus. This is another way which is quite handy for joining things together, and also we have a nice regular grid at the end of it to sculpt on. So if we say pick the sculpting tool, it's nice and even surface to sculpt on. Okay, other mesh tools, we can also use mesh tools to subtract. So for instance, let's just make a simple lathe and make another lathe cutting through it. Whoops. And I'll move this off center. Now I'll subtract children. And it's effectively taken a big bite. If we increase the resolution as well to medium resolution, you can see that we just take a bite at a higher resolution. Again, you get a nice even distribution of triangles by using the relax command. And we've taken a nice big bite out of that cylinder. The fit to commands are one more way in which you can adapt a mesh into a new shape. So if I say, for instance, select a large part of the mesh, smooth the mask, so that's a nice bumpy part of the mesh, we could for instance fit that to a plane, and that's flattened out that area of the mesh. If we've got some noise on the mesh, maybe we would want to fit it to a sphere or a cylinder, and that's wiped out all of the noise on there. Let's do one more fit. It's good to soften the edges sometimes. Let's fit that to another plane. It's just a slightly more precise way of doing what you'd get with the flatten tool. There we go, flatten the rest of the shape with the flatten tool as well. Finally, there's two types of mesh in Curvy. There's the normal mesh, which doesn't add new triangles as you sculpt, and the adaptive subdivision mesh, which does add new triangles as you sculpt. So I'll just demonstrate that. So this mesh is going to be the adaptive mesh, and the mesh on the right is going to be the normal mesh. And I'm going to use a very small sculpting tool. See, it's adding new triangles everywhere we sculpt, whereas on the other mesh it's moving the triangles where we sculpt but not adding any new ones. You can also turn this behavior on and off with the divide tick box in the paintbrush tools. So I've turned divide off, and now the adaptive one will sculpt without adding any new triangles. That's sometimes useful if you're just using a masking or colour painting tool. And that's mesh tools in Curvy.